Willard had to say about those who really struggle to find anything good out of the relationship they had with their parents. He said this: if you do not deeply appreciate the weight of the fact that they have given you the gift of life, you are condemned to despising yourself, for you are the life that they generated. If you never press through your disrespect or your rejection of your parents and who they are, there will be a similar disrespect for yourself. A long and healthy existence rooted deep in the soul requires that at some level we be grateful to God for who they are, not necessarily for all the things that they have done. And I want to say to you, if you've been raised in an environment where the way you have viewed the past has been filled with pain, today the Spirit of God wants to come to you and say this: let the value of the fact that you are here be as heavy as it really is. And begin to say, thank you. Because of that man and that woman, I have a life. And for this I am grateful. Because God can redeem lives. God can add to you the gift of everlasting life. And not just a long life, because some people say, I don't want everlasting life, it's been so miserable, who'd want that to go on forever? But that's not what everlasting life is about. It's a quality of life, not just a length of life. It's a life in which God, the presence of God, the goodness, everything you were ever born and created for is radiant in your experience. Don't pass that up. And maybe today, before you leave here, God would want you to come to your heart and say, from this moment I want you to lift up gratitude for the life you have, and I'll work with you on the healing of the disappointments that you've had. Now I want to say that I'm one of those who can honestly say, I'm so grateful to say, I do not have the same challenge that people from a broken family have. One of the things I'm grateful for, I don't have the same challenges to deal with that my wife has had to deal with. Because if I look back on my relationship with my mum and dad, my mum was nearly perfect. Girls are like that. Girls are made out of sugar and spice and all things nice. My mum was a wonderful, wonderful woman. If there was anything that I wished would have been different about my mum, was that she was so reserved. She was such a modest and reserved person. It wasn't easy sometimes to have deeply personal conversations. I remember sitting with her once when I was wondering whether I was in love with Helen and maybe would we ever marry. And I remember saying to her, Mum, I don't know if I love Helen. And she said, well, do you need to know? And I said, well, I guess not. And that was the end of the conversation. I would have loved it if there had just been an easier opportunity to see into her heart. But she was an extraordinary person. My dad, it's not so hard for me to bump into difficulties with my dad. Often that's the way it is. Not always, but often that is the way it is with boys. The relationship with Dad was not that great. See, there were a couple of things about my dad that really disturbed me. In fact, in many ways disrupted our relationship. There were two things about my dad I profoundly wish had been different. The first was this. If ever I disappointed my dad, he could just go completely silent and withdraw. And the first time I ever saw it was when I was 4 years old. And this is incredible. The fact that I can tell you about this demonstrates how it marked my heart. 4 years old, Dad and I made a kite together. Dad made the kite, I watched him doing it out in the backyard with sticks and string and brown paper. And we went over the park and we flew the kite and it was fun. Our string wasn't as long as the other dude's kite had a swimfish. We'd had a longer string, but we had a great string. It was fun. Dad goes off to school on Monday morning because Dad was a school teacher and I'm 4 years old, I don't go to school yet. So I'm bored, so I decided I'm going to fly the kite. So I take the kite and I head across Belmore Road. If my mother had known I'd crossed Belmore Road at the age of 4, she would have handed me into the police, I think. But across the road I went to Macleay Park, and I can still remember the day. I can picture it in my mind. The clouds are scudding through the sky and the wind's howling through the gum trees. This is not a day to be flying a kite. But I had a crack at it, and the kite just bounced over Belmore Road and ended up being wrecked. And I carried it home a mess, and I put it down outside the back door. And when my father came home and saw the ruined kite, this sad look came over his face. He never said a word. He never fixed the kite, and we never flew it again. It's like he took a backward step. You know, I'll tell you something extraordinary. I shared this story in church one Sunday morning. One of my staff came up to me at the end of the service and said, "Al, do you realise you do that to us?" I said, "What?" He said, "You aren't a yell. You know, when we disappoint you, you don't yell at us. That's not what you do. You just go quiet and look at the cupboard. You know, you do exactly what your dad did to you." I said, "I don't do that." "No," he said, "honestly." He said, "You do." I said, "Oh, you're sacked. You're No, he didn't. I didn't say that. What an extraordinary thing. I tell a story from the age of 4 in my church, and a staff member comes up and says, "You know, Al, you do that to us." Because it marked me. I never saw my father process that stuff well. And to this day, the reason I could tell that story, and it was new to me that I was still doing it, was because I had never processed it. I'd never seen that I could still be repeating it with my kids, with my wife, with my staff. And as a result, I had to take a backward step and say, wow, here I'm talking on relationships. I tell them a story and they can see the dynamic of work in my life in my 50s. That's the power of this kind of stuff. The other thing my father did that I wish wasn't quite the way it was if he didn't go quiet, he could blow up in your face. And every now and then my father blew up in my face. And when it happened, it was flippin' scary. Boy, it was scary. The worst belting I ever got from my dad was at the age of 14, and he belted the daylights out of me for buying a bicycle tube. Now, I had a paper round. I earned my own money. I had my own bank account. And I got a flat tyre in the front of the tyre of my bike. And I decided, well, I'll just buy a new tube. And I went up the street with my own money. I bought a tube. I put it in the bike. And when my dad heard that I'd bought a bicycle tube, he tore a branch off a tree and gave me the worst thrashing of my life. It alienated me from my father. Because I thought afterwards, how was I supposed to figure that out? Buy a bicycle tube, belt the daylights at it. How does that work? I wasn't smoking the tube, Dad. It's not margarine, Dad. It's a bicycle tube. Get it. And as a result, I took a backward step from my father. The reality is, there were things about my dad I didn't like. But if you'd asked me in my 30s, do you have unforgiveness towards your dad? I would have said, oh, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Unforgiveness? Of course not. People make mistakes. But I was in my office one day counselling someone, and as I was counselling them, it seemed like they had nothing good to say about their family. And I said to them, tell me this. You know, it sounds like nothing good ever happened in your family. Have you ever done a treasure hunt on your household? Did anything good ever happen? I said, tell me something good. Come on, tell me something good. And we started to write down good stuff. And the more she explained good stuff, the more she remembered good stuff. And the list on the page got longer and longer and longer. And by the time she left, she'd realised there was so much good stuff in the family, she'd just completely blown it off. And it changed her whole perspective on her family. We did a treasure hunt. Well, when she left, I was moved by it because I realised I've never done that with my own family. And that afternoon I sat down and I did a treasure hunt on my father. Sitting at my desk, I began to let the good stuff be as good as it really was. And I started writing it down. And the more I wrote, the more moved I was at how privileged I was. My father loved my mother. My father was so stable. He was like a rock. My dad had one job all his life as a school teacher who became a primary school principal. He paid bills, he worshipped God, taught us to love the Bible. He was just such a rock. He served people. He was a decent, honourable man. And the more I wrote down, the more I let the good stuff be as good as it was, I fell in love with my own father. And that day I wrote him a letter and I said, Dad, I had never told you how much I appreciate. I'm adding here the gift of Thanksgiving. Never told you how thankful I am for the good stuff you brought in my life. And I just began listing it all down. And the last thing I said, and whatever stability I have in my life, I owe that to you. And I posted it off to my dad. Now the weird thing was, he never mentioned that letter to me. Never once did he ever mention that. He never even told me he got the letter. But it didn't matter one bit because I had now honoured. I'd let the good stuff be as good as it was, and I'd added to that Thanksgiving. And as a result, it totally changed my heart toward my dad. I loved him from that day on. Every time I'd see my dad, I'd go, I'd wrap my arms around him, I'd kiss him right in the face. He never knew what to do with that. He was like a little lamb poacher. My mother told me sometime afterwards that the day he got that letter, he'd been in a bad mood for 3 days. And when he read the letter, it just totally brightened his heart. He wanted to go down the street and buy a picture frame and frame it and hang it up in the kitchen because it was on church letterhead paper. It was like a note from God. You know? Mum said to him, "Oh, Roger, you can't put personal letters up on the kitchen wall. You don't do that." He never mentioned it to me. But I want to tell you, by doing a treasure hunt and letting the good stuff, reminding myself of the good stuff that had come my way, changed my heart. I loved him to the day I died. I'll tell you one other thing that really helped, and that was this. My wife said to me one day, "Al, you need to know something about you. You need to know more about your dad than you know." Because often you see, we don't realise that our parents had a family of origin too. They've had a whole bunch of life experiences that made them what they are. And we often don't know what those stories are. And one day Helen said, "Al, you've got to take your dad home and to his hometown, get him to tell you all his stories." And we did it. She said, "He's not going to be around forever. You've got to go and get him while he's alive. Go get the stories." So we took him back to the old gold mining town of Malden in Victoria, where my dad was born and grew up. And all day long we travelled around and he told us stories. He took us to the little primary school where he was raised and did his primary education. Told us some funny stories. Told me about how one day he got some sheep droppings and put them in a brown paper bag and took them to school and told all the kids they were aniseed balls. I tell you what, I understood a bit about my naughtiness right there, because I reckon I had a few of those racked up as well. He took us to the little Methodist church and showed us where he used to pump the organ every Sunday, because he came to Jesus when he was 4 years old. And all he ever did was he served. First he served, pumped the organ. He served then as a young Sunday school teacher, and then he became a lay preacher. I understood something about my dad's stability. This has been going on ever since he was a child. He took us to a dam where he showed us a place where one of his friends had drowned in his teenage years. You know, I could never understand why Dad was freaking out every time we went down the river. He was always angry about, "Don't you go there." And I thought, "What's wrong with you, man? It's just water." Yeah, I guess when you buried a friend, it changes the way you see it when your kids head off down a river. He took me to a little white house. He showed me where a little white house where his mother had raised 9 children as a single parent. Wow. He showed me where he used to herd cows. And he told me the stories about how he'd go down every day for the guy to bring the cows in for milking. He'd herd them in, and the guy would give him a halfpenny a week for herding the cows, and how he would take it home and put it in his mother's hand. I watched my father do that all his life. He'd bring his salary home every fortnight and put it in my mother's hand. But as he told me that story that day, I finally understood that belting I got about the bicycle tube. See, I grew up in a home where a kid could have a paper round, and the first thing I'd do when I got paid on a Saturday morning is I'd head straight to the milk bar and buy myself a double lime malted with a big scoop of ice cream. My dad didn't grow up doing that stuff. He grew up in a single parent home with 9 kids, with a courageous mother putting every single one of them through tertiary education. And they all worked together as a team, and his little halfpenny would go into the bin along with everybody else's halfpennies to make that house work. And years down the track, I went and bought a bicycle tube, and I touched a fear in my dad's past. And he belted me for it. Now, that was the day I understood it. Now, I could have done a number on that. I could have gone up to my dad and said, "Dad, today the Spirit of the Lord's revealed something to me. The Spirit of the Lord's revealed to me how you've been living under a spirit of poverty. The devil ripped your heart through poverty and twisted you out of shape. And then I grew up in this household as a poor innocent child. I bought a bicycle tube and you nearly murdered me about it. But today the Spirit of the Lord is flowing with love through my heart. And I determine today to forgive you all your sins and iniquities with which you've ever offended me. I release you, Dad. I release you. Didn't have to do any of that nonsense. All I had to do was see it and hear it, and I realised my dad had a different life to me. It's okay, Dad. It's okay. One last thing. We often don't realise that people can only ever be who they are. We often get cross with people because we needed them to be